The book is based on years of research, combing through both the college's archives and private collections, as well as an endless hunt for great images and countless interviews. I'm here tonight with two of my research assistants for the book, now both PhD candidates. They are Constance Holden from the class of 2015 and Matthew Randolph from the class of 2016. Without their hard work, the book could never have been written. While we were brainstorming about this program, we decided we really wanted it to include participation from the audience, meaning you. So we invite you to submit your own brief Amherst story in the Q&A, responding to one of the three I, Mind, Heart prompts. I, what at Amherst forever changed the way you see the world? Mind, what at Amherst blew your mind? And Heart, what at Amherst touched your heart? Please use your full name when you submit. The writers of the stories that we select to read aloud tonight will receive a free copy of the book. Now, I just want to note that we are being recorded. I, Mind, Heart. The title I had from the very beginning, before the ink on the book contract was even dry. I wanted something that got at the essence of what the Amherst experience is at its best. The words come from Hymn to Amherst, the song that whenever I attend Amherst events, I'm embarrassed to say, makes me choke up. Written in 1955 by music professor Henry Mishkin with lyrics by Janet Morgan, it's her ending that gets me. Youth and beauty, learning, faith, bound by friendship's charter. To the college we have made with eye and mind and heart. I don't actually know her source, though there's an old Scottish traveler's proverb that says a story should be told eye to eye, mind to mind, and heart to heart. That's the spirit the book was written in, and also the spirit of our gathering tonight. But before I launch into stories from the book, I want to dedicate my words tonight to the memory of my father, Thomas Pick, class of 1952, who died last December non-virally. A chemistry major at Amherst, he was the first Jewish member of his fraternity. As an alum, he was very devoted. His support was instrumental in getting Amherst's Environmental Studies Department off the ground. Together with my mom, Sue Pick, he created the Pick Readership to foster environmental research at the college. This year, the Pick Reader will be Professor Jill Miller, an expert on the ecology and evolution of plant reproduction, particularly in the genus Lycium, a flowering plant in the nightshade family. My father, who loved both cracking codes and growing plants, would be thrilled. I, Mind, Heart. It was an organizing principle for the book. Roy Peter Clark, my journalism teacher at the Poynter Institute, said that for the purpose of writing, everything comes in threes. All lists should consist of threes. 2 is too short and 4 is too long. But I, Mind, Heart is perfect. And I, Mind, Heart also works beautifully in a second way, as an organizing principle for memories of your time at the college. First then, I, Mind, Heart is, well, let's be blunt, a coffee table book. And so it lives or dies by its photographs and also by its design, done by the incredible Jean Wilcox in Boston. If we were meeting tonight in person, you could have actual books to flip through and you would see how beautiful they are. In the context of Zoom, well, you'll just have to use your imagination. In truth, the book contains so many fun facts and good stories about Amherst that it was difficult to choose what to speak about tonight. In putting the book together, I wanted to see Amherst from top to bottom, inside and out, from its beginnings until now. As for the top, well, there was really only one place that I dreamed of going, to the Tower of Johnson Chapel. The view, if you haven't been up there, is pretty heart-stopping. This hand-colored photo was taken a century ago and then made into a postcard. And this was the view on the day I finally went up myself, accompanied by Stephen Pedagorski, class of 1975, the talented, funny, and dedicated main photographer for the book. From this angle, not much has changed. Well, except for the spectacular growth of the University of Massachusetts off in the distance. For the cover of the book, I wanted something timeless. And of course, the focal point of the college is and has been, ever since it was completed in 1827, Johnson Chapel. The photograph for the book cover was taken by Susan McCullough. Susan, who is, by the way, the wife of Rachel Maddow, specializes in Polaroids, which I love. And she uses old film so that her results are always evocative, maybe even a bit dreamy and unpredictable. Also, she was willing to go up in the college's cherry picker to take photos from on high. These are some of the versions. That was Spooky Amherst, Heavenly Amherst, and ultimately the one that we chose for the book cover. This one did not make it into the book. This eye-pleasing building was Walker Hall, once Amherst's new state-of-the-art science center. And then this. Walker Hall had a terrible fire in 1882, barely a dozen years after it was built, at the cost of $120,000, which was more than the cost of all the other campus buildings combined. The fire took place on a March night during spring break, when the campus was dead quiet. No one was inside. Little survived except what was in the college vault. One terrible loss was Amherst's world-class collection of minerals, with 25,000 specimens. As W.S. Tyler wrote in his History of Amherst, this collection of gems, a cabinet of singular beauty and priceless worth, even these minerals, strange to tell, were reduced to ashes. Scarcely a trace of them could be found in the debris after long and diligent search. Was it arson? The New York Times reported that the fire seemed suspicious. There were no obvious causes, given that no light was lit inside the building that night, no smokers were inside, and no fire had been lit in the furnace for several days. Using insurance money and generous donations, Walker Hall would soon rise from the ashes. Its nearly identical replacement, again built of local granite, and this time more fireproof, opened in 1884, just 2 years later. Tyler described the rebuilt hall as, more than ever, the archives, the treasury, the capital, the acropolis of Amherst College. It would be torn down in 1963 to make room for Robert Frost Library. Next comes a story of both eyes and a telescope. It's about Professor David Todd, class of 1875, who returned to his alma mater to teach astronomy. Under his initiative, in 1903, Amherst built this new and much larger observatory, replacing the old one that was attached to the octagon. The college got a world-class telescope to match, a refractor with an 18-inch aperture, made in Massachusetts at a cost of $12,000, some 3.2 million in today's dollars. Late in his career, Professor Todd was befriended by Percival Lowell, a wealthy Harvard grad who was obsessed with proving that Mars was inhabited. Part of that mission involved photographing the canals of the red planet, which he believed were built by Martians. Lowell recruited Todd to lead an expedition to Chile to observe and photograph Mars when it was in opposition and close to the Earth, invisible just above the southern horizon. For the expedition, Todd removed Amherst's brand new telescope from the college observatory and packed it up for the long trip south. In the Atacama Desert, the Amherst telescope was set up outside, as you see it in this photo, without any dome or roof to protect it. The mission was successful in a way in that many photographs of Mars were obtained. Percival Lowell made countless sketches of the canals he saw through the telescope, which were supposedly built by Martians in a dying civilization. Note that these supposed canals are not the same as the possible ancient stream beds that were observed during the Mars Explorer missions. More likely, scientists say, Lowell was actually mapping the veins of his own retinas, which often appear to observers when using very high magnification. Fairfield Porter spent the year 1969 to 1970 at Amherst, where he painted this view of Frost Library. It's the only one I've ever seen that makes the library look beautiful, and so I wanted to include it. And these were the steam tunnels that used to run under much of campus. I wanted to see them with my own eyes before most were destroyed during construction of the new Science Center. When he was a student, Bruce Becker, class of 1980, mapped the entire network from Valentine to Mead Art Museum and beyond. He recalled, "We went through every steam tunnel we could find. My favorite was the pillow room. The pillow room was located under one of the social dorms. measured about 15 feet by 15 feet, and it was filled with pillows. The college used to use them in its summer programs. We'd break in and then we'd just hang out there in the pillow room and giggle. 50 or 100 people would go there after parties. It was dark. You'd have to be really quiet. For the book, I was actually hoping to collect and publish steam tunnel stories, but I never received many. Perhaps not many can be told. Perhaps you have one for us tonight. As for my own eyes story, what at Amherst changed the way I see the world forever? During my sophomore year, I lived in Tyler House with a group of intense, quirky, and very creative people. My dearest friend, Marta Siberio, and I had a double room with a beautiful arm of ivy growing across our windows. Marta and I stayed up late into the nights, talking about everything under the sun. In those never-ending conversations, we felt we discussed pretty much everything two human beings could discuss. Coming from such different backgrounds, hers Cuban, mine European Jewish, we realized that there is no single way to understand human experience, no one right way to think or to talk or to solve problems. There is no single right way to be a good person, not at Amherst College and not on this earth. We saw the strength that grew out of intertwining our differing opinions, languages, and perspectives. As for that vine that grew across our window, little did we know then that it would bind us together for our whole lives. I mind heart. Next comes mind. There's so many stories at Amherst of intellectual feats, so many stories that blew my mind. Did this young man, Henry Hyde, class of 1861, actually figure out how to throw a curveball during physics class, becoming the first ever pitcher to throw one? Hyde was Amherst's star pitcher during the first ever intercollegiate baseball game played between Amherst and Williams in 1859. It was a doubleheader of sorts. Day one was baseball, day two was chess. Amherst won the baseball game 73-32. Yes, under somewhat different rules from today. For example, if a runner was caught between the bases, you could make an out by throwing the ball at the player. Ouch. Williams had insisted on the chess match, played the next day. But in this, Williams fared no better, resigning at the 49th move. In terms of my own intellectual curiosity and my thirst to do original research for the book, one priority was getting into the Library of Congress to find out what was in the files of Charles Hamilton Houston, class of 1915, from his Amherst days. Houston became a prominent civil rights lawyer who argued cases before the Supreme Court. He was known as the man who killed Jim Crow. His files turned out to contain treasures. Houston's responses to his 1915 seniors survey seemed worthy of a history paper, if not an entire senior thesis, just in themselves. His favorite drink? Adam's ale, better known as water. His favorite poets? Poe, Coleridge, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, whose name will come up again later in Matt's presentation. Charles Hamilton Houston's survey also served as our inspiration for tonight's program. I hope, by the way, that you've already submitted your I Mind Heart stories in the Q&A. And one surprise discovery was that Houston was also a cartoonist. Here, Amherst is beating Williams 99-0, while one base runner reads a book and another picks a daisy. Now, how many of you have heard of Herman Muller? I first learned about his time at Amherst from Jeffrey Hall, class of 1967, who won a Nobel Prize in 2017 for his work on circadian rhythms, and who kindly granted me a phone interview. I almost couldn't believe his story about Muller when he first told it to me. Muller came to Amherst College in 1940, taking an untenured position in biology. He was a socialist, and his radical politics made it difficult for him to find a job. He studied the genetics of Drosophila, fruit flies, and somewhat reluctantly, he taught classes to undergraduates. Amherst let him go in 1945, and then Indiana University took a risk and hired him. Just 1 year later, in 1946, Muller won the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine for his discovery that mutations can be induced by X-rays. For the life of the mind at Amherst, that one was truly a loss. And this is Tillie Olson, author of the famously powerful short story collection, Tell Me a Riddle, about the lives of working class women. Olson didn't even have a high school diploma, let alone the Harvard PhD held by so many Amherst professors at the time. And yet she was hired by Amherst in 1969 to teach literature and writing. She led creative writing seminars and created a course called Literature of Poverty, Oppression, Revolution, and the Struggle for Freedom. When 63 students signed up, some had to be cut. The registrar sent Olson a note. Sorry to greet you first with problems, but you're too popular. Later, her syllabus would be widely circulated, influencing literature courses at many other colleges and universities. I mind heart, and last comes heart. The story of one of Amherst's early students, Reuben Tinker, class of 1828, touched my heart, serving as a powerful reminder of what an Amherst education can mean and how it can change people's lives. Tinker was the 7th child of a family in Chester, a tiny village in the western Massachusetts hill towns. When he turned 14, his family decided that he was not strong enough to be a farmer like his father. So they found him a job as a store clerk. But Tinker wrote to his mother about his dream. I am persuaded if my life is prolonged and my health spared, by application, I shall succeed in acquiring an education. I believe this because my heart is set upon it. In 1821, he quit his job in Hartford and set off for Amherst on foot, for he couldn't afford the stagecoach. The first day, he walked the 30 miles to Springfield. That night, a freak April nor'easter dumped a foot of snow and showed no sign of stopping. The next morning, he set out into the blinding storm, weary and freezing. He told the story afterwards. I said to myself, what, you, Reuben Tinker, expect to be a minister and perhaps a missionary and be disheartened at this? Arriving at last in Amherst, Tinker enrolled in Amherst Academy, the local prep school, and studied classics for 3 terms. He was then able to enter Amherst College in the fall of 1823 at the age of 24. To pay for his education, for he received no support from Amherst Charitable Fund, he swept the college hall, taught, wrote, did bookkeeping, and rang the college bell. He ate cold meals in his dorm room to save money, and yet he never complained. In one letter home, he merrily described his supper of bread and milk as he sat in his westward window, bidding the sun good night. This next story involves heart in a more anatomical sense. Who is this fellow? Edward Hitchcock, science professor and 3rd president of Amherst, not only wanted students to be healthy, he wanted them to understand their bodies. In the 1840s, Hitchcock lamented that the college had not a single anatomical model or preparation, not even a skeleton, nor any of the large works on anatomy. And of course, the instruction given must be very meager. It seemed a shame to profess to give young men a liberal education and yet leave them ignorant of their own bodies, so curiously and wonderfully made. So Hitchcock decided to purchase a life-size human model from France, spending $700 out of his own pocket. That would be $23,000 today. Dr. Louis Ozu's models were made from a top secret kind of paper mache, and this one could be taken apart to display various organ systems. Amherst mannequin has unfortunately not survived, not even its heart. But I was able to track down one of these life-sized human models made by Ozu in excellent condition at Cambridge University in England. Professor Hitchcock, armed with his papier-mâché model and a new human skeleton, then developed 25 lectures for Amherst students on anatomy and physiology. You might observe that the mannequin is, well, not quite anatomically correct. Amherst was founded by descendants of Puritans, after all. Many people know the story of Joseph Hardinissime, class of 1870, the first Amherst graduate from Japan who went on to found Doshisha University. But the story of Tingliang Ho, class of 1883, the first Amherst graduate from China, was hardly known at all. I'm using the anglicized names that the men use at Amherst here. Ho came over as part of the Chinese educational mission, an ill-fated attempt to educate 120 Chinese students in the US during the 1870s. He arrived in America when he was only 13. He learned English, boarded with a local family, and graduated from Northampton High School. He then became the only student from the Chinese educational mission to come to Amherst, with most attending MIT and Yale. But in 1881, at the end of Ho's sophomore year, as tensions rose between China and the US, China issued an imperial edict recalling all of its students home. Ho was conscripted into the Chinese Navy, becoming a doctor aboard a warship. His health suffered terribly from the exposure and strain, and he died before reaching the age of 30. His story touched my heart because he had been, from such a young age, at the mercy of powers beyond his control. I mind heart. So lastly, this is my personal heart story. When I was a first year at Amherst, I sang in a performance of Bach's St. John Passion, and the music was so gorgeous that I nearly converted right then and there. Toward the end of the 2-hour oratorio, after the death of Jesus, a soprano sings a slow and heartbreaking aria backed by an oboe continuo. For our concert, although I didn't know it then, these were performed by a husband and wife team, with Melinda Kessler-Spratlin singing the soprano part and music professor Louis Spratlin playing the oboe. Zerfließe mein Herz, melt my heart in floods of tears. I was so transported by the beauty of the melody and by the unearthly communication between these two human beings that I went into a kind of bliss state. And when the conductor cued us in the chorus to stand up, instead of getting up very quietly as we'd been instructed, I rose with my metal folding chair stuck to my butt until it crashed down with a huge bang, and I got an incredibly dirty look from the conductor. But the truth is, I didn't care, because it was being transported that mattered, having that moment in my heart. And 41 years later, I still remember it as if it were yesterday. Next to speak with her own Amherst stories will be Constance Holden from the class of 2015. Constance is a second-year PhD student at the University of Connecticut. She studies the histories of the African diaspora in the US and Latin America, focusing on representations of race, gender, and nation in popular culture. Originally from Bridgeport, Connecticut, Constance has traveled across Europe and the Americas, including Chile, Argentina, and Ecuador. At Amherst, Constance served as the historian for the Black Student Union, chair of the 2015 Black Alumni Weekend Planning Committee, and co-chair of the Bisemester Christian Worship Series. After graduating from Amherst with a BA in Spanish, as well as a 5-college certificate in Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies, she pursued a career in international and higher education. A passion for storytelling anchors her academic and personal pursuits. She's dedicated to cultivating a greater sense of belonging, equity, and inclusion in the stories that she shares, aiming to inspire radical imaginings of the future.
Good evening, everyone. It is so good to be here this evening. Thank you to Nancy, to my fellow research assistants, and to the team that's helped organize this event. I came to this project with the help of Matt Randolph, who introduced me to Nancy in 2017. Matt and I have quite similar academic interests, and those coalesce at Amherst in our work as the historians for the Black Student Union. My work on this bicentennial project built on my experience researching the hidden histories of Black students, faculty, alumni, and staff at the college. For the book, I conducted interviews, fact-checked, edited, and explored the archives, seeking to put together the pieces of Amherst Black histories. For the next few minutes, I'm going to focus on 2 Black women of Amherst College who appear in the book. I will share fragments of the stories of Dean Anawumi Jean Moss, who joined Amherst in 1985 as the coordinator of student support services, and later Associate Dean of Students, and Lucia Irene Butts, class of 1977, the first Black woman graduate of the college. I reflect on what I learned from each of their experiences at Amherst and the opportunities that their stories present for interrogating how history is made, what we choose to remember, and how memories come to be. I interviewed Dean Moss in 2018. It was such an honor because Dean Moss was a pivotal mentor to me during my Amherst years. I was living in Amherst at the time, and so I drove to her home. It was probably snowing because it always seemed to be snowing in Amherst, and we had a conversation over dinner. To have the space to commune with her, to see the twinkle that twirled in her eyes when speaking about Amherst, to feel her reflecting on her tenure, it was an absolute joy. What shined through with each revelation was that Dean Moss understood her purpose clearly at Amherst, to help students have safe passage through the college, as cited in the book. Dean Moss, when arriving in the mid-'80s, prioritized uncovering, quote, the importance of dealing with the dimensions that were Amherst, that made up Amherst, the different layers of Amherst. For Dean Moss, it was absolutely imperative to give students the tools to be heard, seen, and understood. In lots of ways, this was her working as the storyteller that she is, empowering students to find their voice and to stand tall in their power. She shared the story of a student from the class of 1997, who Dean Moss identifies as having, quote, spearheaded one of the most important civil discourses about unpleasant things at Amherst. The student went to Dean Moss's office one day in 1994 and disclosed, Dean Moss, we're having a difficult time. And it isn't because we don't want to, but we don't feel welcome here. And Dean Moss encouraged them to take the lead in organizing a meeting at Charles Drew House with faculty, staff, and students. This meeting, which came to be known as the Drew House Forum, culminated in a campaign called A Promise to Keep, a commitment by faculty to cultivate a supportive and equitable learning environment inside and outside the classroom. The Moss Quantitative Resource Center was a direct result of this. When Dean Moss retired in 2006, alumni took the time to curate a scrapbook of heartfelt messages that spoke to her impact on their lives. According to a 2006 write-up in the Amherst magazine, one alum expressed, I can hear your voice in so many aspects of my life, and it always reminds me to respect myself, to speak up, and to be courageous. You've been a shining example of these things to me. Dean Moss, in her own ways, made the college with eye and mind and heart. 8 years before Dean Moss started at the college, Lucia Butts was ending hers. She came to Amherst from Smith, graduating with the class of 1977 as the first Black woman graduate. Lucia studied music, English, and political science. After Amherst, she became a storyteller in her own right, pursuing an acting career in film and television. She appeared on shows like The West Wing and ER and Sweet Jane. She adopted Lucia Vincent as her stage name and sometimes went by Irene, her middle name. In 2002, she published a book titled Sexual Lynching. In the text, Lucia briefly describes Amherst as an excellent institution when she recounts a conversation that she had with skeptical colleagues who questioned her education. Lucia instead centers her narrative around her journey toward liberation, toward a future where she would no longer endure sexual harassment and find justice unserved. In 2017, her brother Eric Butts posts on the Amazon reviews for the book that my sister was ahead of her time, which is testament to the sexual harassment revolution going on. As Nancy writes in the book, for taking on this topic, she was a woman ahead of her time. Throughout the text, Lucia shows a depth of self-awareness and a desire to be well. At Amherst, I imagine that she experienced the weight of what scholar Deborah King calls multiple jeopardies of being Black and woman on an elite, formerly all-men's campus in the 1970s. No doubt that combined with the challenges of her course load, she had to constantly evaluate and prioritize her mental health and wellness. She had to practice self-care at an institution that wasn't ready for her yet. She must have been lonely. Amherst was renegotiating the promises it needed to make to its students, faculty, staff, and alumni as it figured out what kind of institution it was going to be, just as Lucia was figuring out what kind of woman she wanted to be in the world. Lucia passed away in 2011, about a week before I started at Amherst, and the same year that Amherst welcomed its first woman president. I didn't discover her story until my senior year, doing research for Black Alumni Weekend 2015, and even then, she appeared fleetingly in the archives. I yearned for more information. I wanted to know how she navigated Amherst and if and how she eventually felt as though she belonged. But she was too elusive. Did she want to be found? What more did she want the world to know? Both Amherst and Smith only had brief biographical files. No matter how much I look forward to those emails coming through from the archive saying information, but not as much as I was hoping for. Lucia is here though, present, wanting to be heard. But yet, was the archive made to honor her and other women like her? How do we construct a storytelling and archival process that allows for what historian Jessica Marie Johnson calls an accountable historical practice that challenges the known and unknowable about the lives of Black women and girls? How do we understand the silences of the archive, how they're made, but also what they invite us to consider, and the creative pathways they present for uncovering the voices of Amherst's past? But in the words of Dean Moss, problems and challenges are meant to refine, not define. Surely, we have arrived at a crossroads, at two roads diverging in a yellow wood, if you will. I Mind Heart is a blueprint for looking back, taking what we need, and moving forward. I Mind Heart revels in the beauty of Amherst's past, present, and future, complete with the just gorgeousness of the photos included, reckoning with what's missing and what's always been. And Amherst continues to embrace change, innovation, and forward thinking. I admire and love that about our college. Dean Moss and Lucia Vincent changed Amherst just as much as Amherst changed how they viewed the world. I could not have known how much Amherst would change me when I arrived on campus right before Hurricane Irene stormed through in August 2011. For the first few weeks, I felt uncertain and a lot out of place. One Sunday afternoon of orientation, after the storm had passed, I trekked up that Octagon Hill, which wasn't too far from my dorm in South, and went to the Herminia T. Gardner Bi-Semester Christian Worship Series picnic. Students Carlton Copeland, class of 96, and Tracy York from the same class, under the guidance of former Affirmative Action Officer Herminia T. Gardner, founded the service in 1993, the first service taking place in 1994, as a space to affirm African-American religious traditions for the Amherst community. As someone who had grown up in the Black church, Bi-Semester felt like the closest thing to home. At the cookout, I began to chat with the then co-chairs of Bi-Semester, both women of color. I do not know what made them say, hey, you should be the next leader of this ministry. But I took up the call, partially because for the first time on campus, I felt as though I could belong. I felt welcome. And so I gave them a yes laden with trepidation, of course, but I embraced the possibility of what was to come. For the next 4 years, Bi-Semester, in the hollowed and wooden space of Chapin Chapel, was a site of spiritual, emotional, and intellectual nourishment. The food that followed every service, including the macaroni and cheese, which was modeled on the recipe in I Mind Heart, especially filled my soul. I connected with the Reverend Dr. Paul Sorrentino, who continues to be a great mentor to me. And Bi-Semester touched my heart in every way and continues to do so. And often, Dean Moss would be seated in the back of the chapel in her own sacred chair with her eyes closed, opening them only to give us that subtle encouragement that we needed to lead the service with confidence, grace, and peace. And during offering time at Bi-Semester, we would uplift a song that goes, give and it will come back to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Dean Moss, Lucia Vincent, and I gave pieces of our heart to the college, contributing to its making and remakings. And this labor has come back to all of us, pressed down, shaken together, and in good measure. And in our stories, we see what Amherst was, is, all that it could be, and all that it's meant to be, a light, a promise, and a home. I, Mind, Heart is only the beginning for the countless Amherst stories that reside in the eyes, minds, and hearts of people in places far and wide. I encourage you all to submit your own Amherst stories in the Q&A, responding to the prompts in the chat. And this concludes my time. Thank you for listening to my stories. Be well.
Thank you so much, Constance, for your stories and your powerful words. Just wonderful. Next to speak will be Matthew Randolph, class of 2016. He was a history and Spanish double major at Amherst, who also served as the historian for the Black Student Union during his time there. Matt is originally from the Baltimore area, but after graduating, he migrated to California. And now he can barely tolerate weather below 40 degrees. He wonders how he ever survived 4 Amherst winters. Matt is now in his second year of a history PhD program at Stanford, where he focuses on the history of the African diaspora in both the US and Latin America. He cherishes the art of storytelling inside and outside the classroom and has volunteered at local museums throughout the Bay Area, including the African American Museum and Library at Oakland and the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. And I'd also like to express gratitude to my fellow research assistants, Constance and Michael. I would also like to thank the History Department and the Archives and Special Collections team for all their support throughout the years. Having served as a historian of the Black Student Union, I jumped at the chance to join Nancy in crafting this coffee table book as a research assistant. It seemed like the perfect way to stay connected to Amherst after I'd recently graduated and had moved far away from campus across the country to California. As the Black Student Union historian, I channeled my passion for history to make the college archives accessible and relevant for other students. I uncovered the stories of Black alumni and helped my fellow club members to feel a sense of belonging and a home away from home. Serving as a mentor and guide to younger students through the historian role affirmed for me the potential of history to empower communities by finding strength in the past. I hope to do similar work as a research assistant for I Mind Heart. I focus specifically on African American history and Latinx history at the college, especially the history of recruitment to make the college's student body more diverse, which was quite fitting since I worked at the missions office myself as a diversity intern, working on recruiting students from underrepresented communities across the country and around the world. I also explored the history of affinity groups on campus, organizations that support and celebrate students and all their diversity. Among other things, my primary research projects were outreach and interviews with alumni. And for the next few minutes, I'll walk you through some of the insights that I gleaned from these interviews with alumni. But first, let's start with a little history lesson. Okay, here we go. When we think of Black history at Amherst, what do you think of? For most alumni, regardless of their class year, Charles Drew comes to mind. Charles Drew Memorial Cultural House is the physical manifestation of Black history that the average Amherst student is aware of. A themed cultural house one is likely to pass by on the way to and from Valentine Dining Hall. Exactly 100 years after the first Black graduate, Edward Jones, class of 1826, Charles Drew graduated from Amherst in 1926, and he is definitely the most remembered Black alumnus of the college. Drew's life-saving innovations in blood preservation contributed to both the Allied effort during World War II and medical advancement. No matter what academic challenges faced me during my time at Amherst, a glimpse of Drew's face reminded me how I walked in the footsteps of awe-inspiring Black alumni. If Drew could succeed at Amherst almost a century ago and make such a global impact, I felt that I could too. During my junior year at Amherst in 2015, when I lived in Drew House myself, I remembered how often I paused in the lobby to admire the large portrait of the dormitory's namesake. As challenging and vigorous as my Amherst workload may have seemed to me at the time, I saw Charles Drew's face and reminded myself that I walked in the footsteps of incredible alumni. While people may know Drew's accomplishments in the medical field, what most people think about little is his life before Amherst and where he was from. He grew up in Washington, D.C., and attended Dunbar High School. He was not alone. This was a familiar story for the early 20th century Black Amherst student. So who helped Drew become the man who he was? His upbringing, his academic preparation, his community in Washington, D.C., his high school, Amherst? The answer, like most in history, is nuanced. All of the above. A combination of factors made Drew into the man he became. Like most human beings, he is truly a collection of his experiences and the people that surrounded him. In fact, for some class years, students from Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. made up the majority, if not the entirety, of Black students attending Amherst. As a Black public high school in a separate and unequal school system, Dunbar upended the traditional notion of feeder schools as private, predominantly white institutions like Exeter, Deerfield, and Andover. Dunbar men frequently entered Amherst in pairs or larger cohorts. They included men who would go on to become household names in African-American history, such as Charles Drew, but also Charles Hamilton Houston and William Henry Hasty. Dunbar was the first Black public high school in the nation, quote, the jewel in the crown of the Black school system in Washington, D.C. During the age of segregation, for African-American educators with advanced degrees during the era of racial segregation shut out of working at universities other than historically Black institutions, many saw teaching at Black public high schools as a respectable alternative. As a result, Dunbar's teachers included several notable experts in their fields, such as Carter G. Woodson. Known as the father of Black history, Woodson balanced teaching at DC public schools with his doctoral studies. In 1912, he became the second African-American to earn a PhD from Harvard after W.B. Du Bois. Not surprisingly, with teachers of such caliber as one alumnus from the Dunbar class of 1957 recalled, Dunbar became the place to go if you were college material and wanted to be prepared to go. And this is a picture of the Dunbar men from the golden years in the 1920s, including Hasty as well as his classmates from Dunbar. And this is a trio from the class of 1959. This is a quote from Raymond Hayes. He writes, Larry, Bob, and I were very close friends. We grew up in the same neighborhood in Washington, D.C. We're all interested in science and medicine, and were encouraged by the opportunity to attend Amherst together. By the 1960s, however, the pipeline of Dunbar students would cease as the college started to recruit a diverse range of students throughout the nation. And furthermore, the idea of an all-Black public high school faded into history with the desegregation of schools. Dunbar became a neighborhood school, unlike before when it operated more like a contemporary magnet school, pulling Black students from across the district. On top of that, teachers and students left for new academic or professional opportunities now that doors were open to teaching or studying at previously racially segregated institutions. Dunbar's mission as a place to cultivate Black excellence in a segregated school system quickly became antiquated with the reshuffling of desegregation. So from my research, I had a few insights. First of all, I learned how to create an archive when it doesn't exist. I had to contact and interview Dunbar Amherst alumni who were still living. And I learned the importance of oral history, not just relying on the archives, but the people in our communities who can help us understand the past. I did rely on physical documents found at Amherst, but I also thought outside the box and realized that so much historical work is also interpersonal and community work to fill the gaps in the archive. These Dunbar Amherst stories were not waiting for a box for me on campus. I had to go out and get them. Interviewing alumni living today of all ages and generations about their Amherst experience taught me the importance of actively doing history, not just relying on what's there in the archive and what's already been written. In other words, this coffee table book was generative of history and creating an archive from the present moment from the memories that people still hold. It wasn't about synthesizing what we have, but this coffee table book also includes original investigations. We encouraged ourselves to think critically about whose stories we included to make a truly inclusive and accurate representation of the college. A second insight was from my own PhD journey. I'm fascinated by the stories of African-American travelers and the idea of building a sense of home and belonging in a new place. And so the Dunbar Amherst story definitely influenced my current research, thinking about Blackness and travel around the world. A third insight was the most illuminating part of the research, insights into the questions of gender, because I had thought of the Black experience at Amherst initially as a story of men, but actually It is about the woman and community behind these men, how so many Black women educators were part of this Dunbar Amherst story as well. And it was a lesson about doing the history of so-called great men. Often there's a lot of people behind them in their community who help them on their journey to greatness. And since Amherst would not become coeducational until the 1970s, the relationship between Amherst and Dunbar might seem like a story of men on the surface, but Dunbar women simultaneously attended prestigious liberal arts colleges throughout the country, such as Smith, Mount Holyoke, Oberlin, Spelman, and others. And moreover, as educators, mothers, and community leaders, Black women in the nation's capital empowered both young men and women at Dunbar to shoot for the stars. Recently, I've also been working with the Black Women of Amherst project to highlight this hidden history of Black women prior to coeducation. This work on Dunbar is just the start of thinking about African-American history at Amherst in new ways. There are probably several hidden histories of both Black men and women waiting to be discovered in Amherst's archives. And finally, I'd like to share a heart story. To conclude, I'm going to quickly talk about the heart part of I Mind Heart. There was an unexpected family connection in my research. As a historian, I was taught to think objectively about the past and not think about my own personal experiences. So I didn't go in wanting to learn about my own family history. Indeed, I got into this research initially, as I mentioned, wanting to learn more about Charles Drew. At the same time, I should have known that the research path would wind its way back to my family with our roots in Washington, D.C. I always knew that my grandparents attended D.C. public schools, but I did not appreciate that my own grandfather, Nathaniel Randolph, was a Dunbar alumnus until I started my research at Amherst. While I came across Nathaniel's name in a list of Dunbar war veterans and saw Randolph on the list, I began to appreciate that I had Dunbar blood in my veins all along. Nathaniel Randolph certainly had a different trajectory than Charles Drew, the Dunbar Amherst alum and namesake of the Black Culture House on campus, who found the way to preserve blood plasma during World War II. Instead, my grandfather contributed to his country in different ways on the battlefield. Ironically, in his senior yearbook at Dunbar, my grandfather dreamed of becoming a chemist. In another world, maybe he would have done it and changed the scientific world just like Drew. But the nation would have other plans for him during the war. After graduating from Dunbar in 1943, instead of going to college, Nathaniel went overseas to serve in Japan during the war. He survived, returned to marry Ruth, his high school sweetheart from Dunbar, and worked as a postman, a steady federal middle-class job in DC that offered stability to raise a family. His Dunbar experience gave him an appreciation for education that he would pass on to his sons and daughters. If Nathaniel could not go to college, he would certainly find a way for his children and grandchildren in DC to do so. I would like to imagine that Nathaniel and I have a Dunbar Amherst connection of our own, even though he never went to Amherst like Drew. As a war veteran who worked hard and provided for his family, he planted seeds of opportunity for my father and me. Nathaniel passed away in 2018, but he lived to see me graduate from Amherst, and we completed the Dunbar Amherst circle in our own unique way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your incredible work researching the Dunbar-Amherst connection, a story that is truly eye-opening. Last, we are going to read a few stories from you, our Amherst audience. And I am going to start with this first one from David Quinn, 1982 graduate, and it's a heart story. Generous Amherst mentors forever touched my heart. I submitted a critical thesis on Eugene O'Neill for my drama honors, plus a rogue honors thesis, a collection of original plays for English. Both disciplines had forged the core of my studies and my growth as what we, in the language of the day, called a person. But why do I say rogue? English did not recognize creative theses in '82. Despite this, I had no trouble enlisting 4 experienced, empathetic faculty, John Cameron, Kim Townsend, and John Cody from English, and Len Berkman, then the chair of drama at Smith, who were willing to sit with me to discuss my off-road contribution with the respect due to official work. I'm a better writer and yes, a more whole person for their exemplary gift of reading and human connection.
And I am going to read a story from Richard Aronson, class of 1969. For me, one word that defines what Amherst means to me, besides the truly beautiful hymn to Amherst, which also reduces me to tears, is idealism. At Amherst, I learned that it's possible, though always challenging, for ideals to come alive. For me, this reached a peak in the spring of 1969 when the college came together for the first moratorium in a spirit of community, respectful dialogue, difficult but important conversations, in the quest to work together for a more just, equitable, inclusive world. This was a special time in the history of Amherst, as Nancy discusses in the book. And then at our unique and inspiring 1969 commencement, the student we chose to speak on our behalf didn't speak, he sang. Larry Dilg brought a band along with him and sang a Bob Dylan love song called Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. This was an epiphany moment. In spite of the very real differences across generations and among our own class, everyone rose at the end of the song in a rounding standing ovation. Thank you for sharing that story.
And I have another story to share. This is a mine story from Lee Francis, class of 83. Something that blew my mind. Thrilled with my admission letter from Amherst in April 1979, I read a few days later in the paper, students occupy the administration building. As a white kid from a white Chicago suburb, it blew my mind. Black students, many students, over 200 students, occupied Converse Hall, sparking a dialogue of change, a boycott, a sit-in. I couldn't wait to get there. Lee Francis, class of 83.
Except I'm on mute. Okay. I, Unforgettable and Indelible, the two Thomas Cole paintings, past and present, in Mead. I discovered them freshman year and visited them as often as possible. And Mind, freshman humanities with Walter Settelo, and junior year Renaissance and Reformation courses with Richard Douglas. Heart, my years at WAMF in the basement of Walker Hall, and my countless hours at Kirby Theater. Thank you so much. I think that we will now wrap up. And if you have additional Amherst stories, you can submit them to alumni@amherst.edu. And we thank you so much for joining us tonight and hope that you will buy the book for more Amherst stories. It is really beautifully designed and has a lot of heart in it as well. So thank you so much, and thanks for joining us tonight.